On today's show, the Houston Rockets' holiday struggles continue with a 20-point blowout loss against the Clippers. What is wrong with Houston's defense? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all those who celebrate. What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. On today's show, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this most recent painful Rockets loss as they continue this downward spiral here in the month of December. Unfortunately, a 128-108 blowout loss at the hands of the LA Clippers. What is wrong with Houston's defense? What is Ime Udoka cooking up as the coach? And then we'll transition and we'll get into hopefully a little bit of holiday optimism, maybe call it copium if you want. But we will end things on a lighter note later on in the episode, as Santa himself may be giving the Rockets the gift of another 3-and-D wing that they so desperately need to be able to hopefully right the ship that is their defense just kind of capsizing currently. Going to get into all of that on today's show. And of course, want to thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. All right, let's talk a little bit about this Clippers game, which was kind of a disaster. Look, this was a game where, frankly, you had a vintage Kawhi Leonard performance, 41 points on 16 of 23 shooting. You had a vintage James Harden game, 29 points on just 14 shots, 12 of 13 from the free throw line, just absurd. Rockets had no defensive answer for this Clippers squad. And they also shot as a team from downtown, 54%, 20 of 37 from beyond the three-point line. And this was, weirdly enough, this was a game in which the Rockets offensively they weren't having really necessarily a bad game. Kevin Durant, 22 points on 8 of 15, but didn't play a single second of the fourth quarter. Alperen Sengun, 19 points on 9 of 16 shooting, 11 rebounds, 7 assists. Didn't play a single second of the fourth quarter. We'll talk about that and Ime Udoka's decision to bench them here in just a moment. Amen Thompson, 19 points on 7 of 10 shooting. Like, this was, not a bad offensive game for the Rockets. They could have done better from beyond the arc, only 30% shooting there, 9 of 30 overall. But the issue in this game, and the issue, the much bigger issue for this Rockets team, especially since the calendar turned to December, is the lack of defensive intensity, of execution, of motivation on that side of the basketball. Realistically, they have slipped after this Clippers game. They have slipped to the 23rd ranked defense in the NBA in the month of December. It's a bottom 7 defense, y'all. That's not good. It's not really sustainable. That's certainly not a contender on paper. So what are these issues with the defense, right? Like, what exactly is happening here defensively? Because one thing is for certain, right? 54% three-point shooting is not sustainable, and that's you could chalk that up to an outlier shooting performance from the Clippers, and that's why the Rockets got blown out in this game, right? 54% shooting versus 30% three-point shooting. Clippers were plus 33 at the three-point line, 20 made threes to just 9 made threes by the Rockets. And yeah, that's kind of the ball game, right? But I also feel like that's kind of really, like, I don't know, basic analysis. Like, I feel like it's a deeper problem than that, because good teams don't let bad teams beat you that easily. Like, that's the reality of the situation. And earlier in the year, right, the Rockets were doing what they were supposed to do against bad teams, right? They were beating up on bad teams. They were manhandling them, frankly. And now they've had multiple bad losses in a row. Like, you go back and you look at if you go look at the NBA standings for the month of December, right? The bottom 5 teams in the West are the Mavericks, the Jazz, the Clippers, the Pelicans, and the Kings. The Rockets have losses to all 5 of those teams. It's not good. it's certainly problematic for this team, and any even semblance of title hopes that this squad has at the end of the season, or let alone title, just even a deep playoff push at this point, right? So what's wrong with the Rockets defense, right? Why can't they get stops? And I've been simmering on this, and I wanted to, be able to actually talk about it on the show to get these words out there, just because, I do think that it's an important discussion to have. And I think that it's something that the Rockets themselves didn't quite think would be as much of a difference maker. Now, first off, obviously nobody planned, right? The organization didn't plan to lose Fred VanVleet. And Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks were a big part of the culture and the identity of this team, specifically on the defensive end, right? Because this was a Rockets team that, even for all the warts that they had offensively these past couple of years, for all the good and the bad of the sometimes you, sometimes me, always us offense, right? Throw out all the offensive stuff, the good and the bad, right? They could always rely on their defense. They were a legitimate force defensively, where even if you couldn't buy a bucket on offense, sometimes you just needed a couple free throws, a bucket here or there. You could go through your own scoring drought, because the Rockets knew how to put clamps on opposing teams and literally prevent them from scoring. They could win games with their defense. It hasn't felt that way this season. And their defense is a far cry from what it used to be. And it could just be as simple as saying, yeah, well, they're losing. They lost Dillon Brooks. They lost Jalen Green, who was an above average defender. They lost Fred VanVleet, right? That's 3/5 of your starting lineup. And to make those drastic changes this offseason, and to have what I feel like are maybe not the right pieces in play here, and I felt this way before the season started. I felt this way when we heard about Ime Udoka's penciled in 4 starters, if you will. In a vacuum, both Kevin Durant and Jabari Smith Jr. are plus level defenders. They're versatile. They're switchy. They've got a lot of length, size. Jabari's an excellent rebounder. They both have good defensive instincts. They're great defenders in their own right. But the Rockets went from having what I would say last season, their starting lineup, right? Fred, Jalen, Dillon, Amen, Sengun. You have at least one elite point of attack defender in Amen Thompson. Then you had 2 very above average, plus level point of attack defenders in Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet. And then at least a plus level point of attack defender in Jalen Green, because Jalen Green was a net positive defender by the end of his career with the Rockets. He excelled a lot defensively. Then you go to this year, where you have Kevin Durant and Jabari Smith Jr., who made up 2 of the replacements for the missing 3 players in the starting lineup. And neither of them are great point of attack defensive guys. They're switchable. They're versatile. They've got a lot of length, yes, but these are not the guys that are going to put clamps on a player on the perimeter. They're not getting into they're not guys that are going to get into the chest of an offensive player and stick to them like glue and fight hard over screens and switch with intentionality, right? They have to back off a little bit. They rely on their length and their size to try and disrupt opposing players. And that's a very different defensive identity than what the Rockets really had last year with most of their starting lineup. So even dating back to the offseason, I was never a huge fan of the idea of starting Durant and Jabari with one another. I get it. Tall, big, 6'11", 7-foot wings, cool. But the Rockets defense really feels like it's struggling to contain things at the point of attack, right? And in particular in this Clippers game, Jabari Smith Jr. got kind of hunted, right? The Clippers were inviting and looking forward to those switches where he was getting, whether it was Harden or Kawhi or whoever, he was getting abused defensively in that Clippers game. And I'm not going to argue that the immediate, adjustment for this Rockets team is to yank Jabari Smith Jr. out of the starting lineup, especially not with a suitable replacement level player to make up for him. But the fact that the Rockets did just recently get Tari Eason back is a huge help to their defense. And hopefully, maybe here on Christmas Day, call it a Christmas miracle, if you will, getting Dorian and Finney-Smith back and available, having both of those guys, giving Ime Udoka more options to turn to defensively will hopefully help right the ship for this Rockets defense, because their defense has been anything but championship level for a while now. unfortunately. And there's other holes, right? There's, Sengun needs to improve defensively. Reed Shepherd is still growing and adjusting and learning the game defensively. There's a lot. And Amin Thompson has regressed defensively because of how big his role has become elsewhere for this team, right? Particularly on the offensive end. So this team has issues, but none of them are unsolvable or unfixable on the defensive side of the ball. Ime Udoka will hopefully soon have all the tools at his disposal to get this team back to a top tier level defense. And once they do that, the offense still has some issues and some areas that need to be cleaned up. But by and large, it is still on paper better than it was last year. The issue more so for me with this team is they need to get back to playing top 5 level defense. And they should be able to with the lineups and rosters that they will hopefully have, or with the lineups that they'll have available in the foreseeable future. Coming up, I do want to talk about Ime Udoka's decision to bench Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun at the end of this Clippers game, as well as some holiday positivity and a look ahead. There we go. For the Christmas Day matchup against the Lakers. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and yes, even Texas. Prize Picks has added an extra layer of excitement to the holiday sports schedule. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. Look, every time that I've picked Alperen Sengun this season for more on his points, rebounds, assists totals, I haven't been disappointed. So you can check out the action over as Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Today's episode is also brought to you by DoorDash. The season's heating up, and DoorDash has a way to keep fans in their bag the whole way through. Whether you're watching the highlights, the tunnel fits, or just your favorite player, DoorDash makes the entire season more fun. Because every player has their bag. With DoorDash, fans have one too. DoorDash keeps your snacks stocked, your gear fresh, and your watch party vibes absolutely on point. Because look, there are nights when your team just stresses you out, right? There have been a lot of those recently if you're a Rockets fan. Let DoorDash become your post-game therapy session. From tip-off to overtime, stay in your bag and order on DoorDash. Get snacks, drinks, gear, whatever gets you through the season, delivered right to your door. DoorDash, in your bag all season long. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. The comments help us out a ton. I want give me, what do you think is wrong with the Rockets defense? Tell me in the YouTube comments. All right. Ime Udoka's decision to bench Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun in the fourth quarter of this Clippers game was peculiar. I didn't agree with it. I kept thinking to myself, I was like, okay, well, I was understandable at first because I thought, okay, well, you played both of them for most of the third quarter, right? Like, he went against his usual substitution patterns, right? Because usually KD plays most of or all of the first and the third and then gets his rest and then comes back in, half of the second and the fourth, and Sengun kind of anchors those non-Kevin Durant lineups, right? But because he played Durant and Sengun for so much of the third quarter in tandem with one another, right? He had to kind of mix up his lineups. And I thought to myself, I was okay, this lineup at the top of the fourth, it's not bad, right? They're playing, kind of a small ball brand of basketball, trying to find a way to claw their way back into the game with Reed Shepherd, Jae'Sean Tate, Amin Thompson, Tari, Eason, and Jabari Smith Jr. I was like, okay. And we've seen it before where Jae'Sean Tate has helped turn the tide of a game with that energy, right? That enthusiasm off the bench. But, the Rockets got this game, it was a 16-point game going into the quarter. And after a few minutes of play into the quarter, the Rockets had this thing at like a 12-point deficit, I think is what they cut it to. And I kept thinking to myself, I was like, all right, when are you coming back with one of your two big guns? Like, when are you going to give them a chance to like really win this game? Because this lineup is giving you like a little bit of juice, a little bit of energy, but waving the white flag like that, I don't know what message Ime was trying to send to his 2-star players. Kevin Durant said after the fact that, he trusts Ime Udoka and his decision making, and because when asked about not being, not playing in the fourth quarter. And so, Kevin Durant's saying the right things, but realistically, that's incredibly frustrating, and I don't know if he's trying to send a message to those two guys in particular that he needs more from them as leaders, as defenders, as guys who are taking pride in firing their teammates up. I mean, we saw it the other day when the Rockets got their big win against the Nuggets. Kevin Durant was demonstrative and he was firing his teammates up and he was vocal. And, that's the most vocal we've ever seen Kevin Durant in a Rockets jersey. And when you go back to a little bit of what I was saying previously, where, by losing Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, two of the guys who helped really instill that defensive culture, two guys who held guys accountable, two of the leaders for this Rockets team, you compare and contrast that with this year's team. Who's the vocal leader of this year's team, right? Kevin Durant's not a vocal guy. He's a lead by example kind of guy. Amen Thompson's not really a vocal guy. He's quieter. He's a bit more soft-spoken, right? Don't get me wrong. He can get fired up and he can have his moments of, intensity and all that. But like, the Rockets need somebody on the floor that can light a fire under everybody else, right? And there are a couple guys on the team that I think are capable of doing that, capable of shouldering that leadership burden and doing it on a consistent basis. I think that Jabari does have the ability to be, Jabari's an incredibly vocal guy. Tari's another one that I think has a chance to be incredibly vocal. And Dorian Finney-Smith, who is supposed to be the, on paper replacement for Dillon Brooks in the first place. All three of those guys have a chance to really do that, to I guess, kind of quarterback the defense, if you will. I've already been on record now as saying I don't super love the fit of Jabari with those other guys in the starting lineup. I think it leaves a lot to be desired from the Rockets' point of attack defense. But with Tari Eason back and slowly ramping up and building up past his minutes restriction currently, and the little bit of a Christmas miracle here with Dorian Finney-Smith being listed as questionable, so not a guarantee that he plays, but listed as questionable for the Rockets' Christmas Day game against the Lakers, getting DFS back, right, and giving Ime Udoka more options, more tools that he can run with in his lineup this season, in his different lineups this season, should help tremendously from a defensive perspective. I know that offensively this team has still been frustrating to watch at times. There's moments when they try, you're trying to watch them figure out these double teams and blitzes on Kevin Durant or Alperen Sengun, and we've bemoaned the fact that Kevin Durant has to be the offensive initiator in so much of these late game sets, especially because it'd be great to actually be able to get KD playing off ball and have him be the play finisher instead of the play initiator, like all that stuff, right? But the issues for this team are much more predicated on the defensive side of the ball than anything to do with the offense. Offensively, they're still going to be a better offensive team than they were last year. The question is, can they get back to a similar level of defense? Can they get back to a place where they can reliably use their defense to get them into games, to help them win games, to close out games, right? Think about all these close losses, all these really embarrassing losses to bad teams that they've had recently. They couldn't buy a stop to save their lives, right? That's part of the problem. And I would argue that the defensive side of things is the bigger of the two problems, right? Offensively, with two superstar caliber players and Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, two top 15 players in the association, you're going to be able to get by on just talent alone. That doesn't mean that there aren't issues and there aren't improvements that can be made and that you don't need to see more creativity from Ime Udoka and his coaching staff, right? There are ways to improve the offense, absolutely. But I think it starts and stops with the defense, because if this team wasn't playing defense at the 23rd best rank in the NBA, if they were even a middle of the pack defense in the month of December, things would look drastically different for this team right now. But their defense has just completely fallen off a cliff. And so Ime has commented on it a couple times post-game now, but he needs to find a way to motivate these guys, right? They need motivation. They need a fire under them. And that fire used to come from Dillon Brooks and also Fred VanVleet, right? Two incredibly fiery personalities, direct extensions of Ime Udoka on the floor. And I don't think Ime has that anymore. Ime doesn't have an extension of himself out there on the floor. I think that Kevin could do it. Kevin's capable. And think about how great it looked in that Nuggets game where the guys completely rallied around KD and his antics and his demonstrative nature in that game. And he was jawing and chirping back and forth. It was fantastic. If Kevin could play like that and have that type of enthusiasm and energy every game, I don't think the Rockets are in this place to begin with. I'm not blaming Kevin, but that's not been his personality for the better part of his entire career. Alperen Sengun is a fiery player in his own right, but I don't know that Sengun is able to, I guess, rally the troops, right? You're not going to get like a Braveheart kind of speech from Alperen Sengun to rally the troops. And collectively, the whole team just needs to be better on that side of the ball, but it starts with the intentionality, right? It starts with the want to, it starts with that fire defensively. And I do think that getting a couple of those pieces back, right, in Tari, Eason, and DFS, those are two guys that do take a ton of pride in their defense. I say that as Tari Eason was the reason for that Kings loss. But, these are two guys that can be those kind of energizer bunnies defensively, right? Guys that they're getting after it and other guys want to follow suit, right? Other guys don't want to drag ass when you see Tari Eason and DFS out there, like really locking in defensively. And so I think that from a culture perspective, righting the ship defensively is the most important thing for this Rockets team. And they have a chance to do it on Christmas Day, right? In front of a national audience, potentially with the return of DFS out there, against a Lakers team that may or may not have Luka Doncic available. If they do have Luka, damn, that's going to be, they're in for it might be a bloodbath. But if they don't have Luka, right, it makes things quite a bit easier to handle. So we'll see what ultimately happens there. But this Rockets team, they need to get right quickly, because once you lose from a coaching perspective, right, from Ime Udoka's perspective, once you start resorting to tricks like having to bench your star players to send a message, things of that nature, if you lose the locker room, if you lose the trust and confidence of your players, if they stop playing hard for you, then it's really hard to come back from that. And so the Rockets are in kind of some dangerous waters right now, but I also trust that at this point, Ime Udoka, while he's shown at times some stubbornness, some inflexibility in some of his decision-making or how he handles, certain lineups or substitution patterns, what have you, so just overall his coaching, right? I think by and large, he has been an absolute saving grace to the Houston Rockets in these last, 2.5 years, 2 years and some change. And so until proven otherwise, I'm giving Ime Udoka the benefit of the doubt that he'll get this thing figured out. They're going through a rough spell right now, but I think they have the tools and the talent to be able to figure this thing out and get back to a level where they are playing what you would consider championship level basketball. So with that, I'm curious your thoughts. What are you hoping to see out of this Rockets team on Christmas Day? Hopefully no more coal in our stockings, because they've been stuffing the stockings full of coal all of December. So hopefully a win. That would be a fantastic present on Christmas Day for Rockets fans everywhere. No more coal from this team, and hopefully a Dorian Finney-Smith debut would be absolutely fantastic. With that, I want your thoughts on everything discussed in today's show. Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.